Welcome back to another topic in our Landarks series. Today we continue with the abomination of desolation. This is part 2. And in the last presentation we had a look at Jesus' end-time speech and what he is predicting, and there we elaborated that frame of events that Jesus said they must come to pass, things that will happen. And we added a third point to our list of reasons why should we build an ark, and this was because of the events that Jesus is proclaiming, there is predicting, and this is wars, pestilences, and famines. That was our focus a bit on this. And so he said, these things must come to pass, that's what he says, and the best place to be when things like these are visiting this earth is out there in the country, in the land. And the worst place to be is in the city. And we also had a look at the abomination itself. And we saw that the abomination of desolation is the key event that Jesus is pointing to. And I already told you that the abomination of desolation has something to do with idol worship. And that the great idol worship in symbolic language that is set up at the end of time is the image of the beast in Revelation 13. So we have to, and since Jesus says we shall study the abomination of desolation in order to understand what it is, so we have to study the book of Revelation in Revelation 13, and we will do this in this topic and in the following. So first part B is now the image of the beast, and we start with the first beast. And it reads in Revelation 13, "Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name." Let me just stop here. We are in Revelation now, in the book of Revelation, and that means we are dealing with symbolic language. Okay, this is not literal reality. Okay, this is symbolic language, and we have to interpret these pictures that are used. Okay, it's not like the most part of the Bible that is pretty plain prophecy. When all the prophets, they were proclaiming something, they did it in plain language. But God sometimes chooses symbols, and then these symbols need to be interpreted, and that's where we are in the book of Revelation. So we have to interpret these pictures, and that also means we need a key by which we can interpret these pictures. And this key is the Bible and not creativity. Okay? And what I mean with this we will see. But just that you are not confused a bit about the language here. So there's the first beast coming up out of the sea. And let me just add also, we will not make an interpretation in detail here. Typically, when I would do this, I would look at all these different pictures that I used and symbols, and we would interpret. We will go into the Bible and see where we find these pictures and symbols explained and interpreted, and then we will try to interpret the whole thing. This time I want to go another way. We will have a look at history. How did Christianity understand these passages right from the beginning? Okay, and how did Christianity in the stream of time a bit understand it? That's the way I want to go here. So there's a beast coming up out of the sea. And then verse 2, "Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshipped the dragon, and who gave authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, 'Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?'" Verse 5. "And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. And all who dwell on earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. We start at the beginning, verses 1 and 2. There it says that this beast that is coming up out of the sea was like, it has similarities with a leopard, with a lion, with a bear, and there's also the dragon mentioned. So there are a few animals listed here. And these animals, for students of Bible prophecy, if they study the book of Daniel, as Jesus told them to do, they will remember these animals because they are coming from Daniel 7. This is a vision that Daniel once had. And there he sees 4 beasts rising up out of the sea. The first is a lion, the second is a bear, the third is a leopard, and the fourth, he doesn't have a name for it, he just is calling it a terrible beast. And it has 10 horns. And now then, out of the beast there is coming something there's another power coming, and this is a little horn. Okay, he calls it a horn of littleness, wordly. Now, how did Christianity understand these symbols? The bear, the lion, the bear, the leopard, and then this terrible beast. And we read on Hippolytus, who lived from 170 to 235. He says, the gold heads of the image. Now let me stop here. What I forgot to say is, Daniel 7, this vision of the 4 beasts, is running parallel with another vision that is recorded in the book of Daniel, and this is in Daniel 2, where it's is a statue, and there it's not 4 beasts but 4 metals, but it's representing the same thing, and that's what he's referring to. So it's 2 different visions, but they mean the same thing, and that's what he's referring to. The gold head of the image, the lioness. I don't know why he's saying it's a female lion, but it doesn't matter. That's the lion here. Was the Babylonians, the Babylonian Empire. The silver arms and shoulders, the bear, the Persians and Medes. And the brass torso and thighs, the leopard. The Greeks ruling after Alexander. The iron calves, the fearsome and terrible beast, the Romans who rule now. Okay, in his time the Roman Empire was ruling. The soles of the feet of clay and iron, the 10 horns which will come in the future. The other small horn springing up among them is Antichrist. That's the way Christianity understood it, right from the beginning. The lion is the Babylonian Empire. The bear is the Persian Empire. The leopard is the Greek Empire, or the Macedonian Empire. And the terrible beast is the Roman Empire. And here you have just the map of the Babylonian Empire. And then the Persian Empire, and you see it's things becoming bigger. And then the Greek Empire is coming, and then the Roman Empire is really huge. But then there is 10 horns upon the head of the terrible beast, and they mean the division of that kingdom. Okay, and that's what he was referring to: succeeding states, states that would come out of the Roman Empire. Okay, and this is how it was fulfilled. The Roman Empire, it decayed. The Roman Empire, it fell apart, literally. And then there's this little horn coming. And he is telling us the little horn, that's the Antichrist. And in Daniel 7, the really important character that is described there very precisely is the little horn. It's the Antichrist. Okay, that's where the focus is, like in the book of Revelation. So, what is he telling us? And this is basically very important. He is telling us that the Antichrist is not in the past. It's still in the future. So, I'm saying this because today Christianity has received an interpretation of Bible prophecy that it's called preterism. And this preterism says that the Antichrist has already been in the past. It was the Roman Empire for the Christians. The Christians, they saw in the Roman Empire, that was the Antichrist for them. But here we have the testimony that this was not understood that way. Maybe there were some, but the general understanding was not like that. They understood the Antichrist to come after the Roman Empire. They clearly understood that the Roman Empire is not the Antichrist. It's the power that would precede the Antichrist. Okay, so first the Roman Empire must decline. And that brings us to a very interesting fact, and that is that because the leaders of the Christian church back then knew that the Antichrist would come after the fall of the Roman Empire, they told the Christians to pray for the Roman Empire and to pray for the Caesar, that the Roman Empire and the Caesar may live long. Because they knew the Roman Empire, this time here with the persecution, it's a hard time for the Christians, but they knew things will become even worse if the Antichrist would rise. So they prayed for the Roman Empire that it may last long. And we see, there's a quote, for example, Tertullian, "There's also another and greater necessity for our offering prayer in behalf of the emperors." So they were praying for the emperors. "Nay, for the complete stability of the empire and for Roman interests in general. For we know that a mighty shock impending over the whole earth, in fact, the very end of all things threatened and dreadful woes, is only retarded by the continued existence of the Roman Empire." And that's what Paul was saying. He says the Antichrist would come, but there's something that is in his way. He cannot come because there's still something in his way. And only if this something is done away, then the Antichrist will come. And that's how the Christians understood it. Okay? That's what he's saying here. The Roman Empire was still in the way of the Antichrist. But once the Roman Empire is done away with, the Antichrist would come. And then he says, "We have no desire then to be overtaken by these dire events. And in praying that their coming may be delayed, we are lending our aid to Rome's duration." And here Tertullian is referring to this quote of Paul, "And now you know that what detains, that he might be revealed in his time. For the mystery of iniquity does already work. Only he who now hinders must hinder until he be taken out of the way." Okay, that's quoting 2 Thessalonians 2. And then Tertullian is commenting on this. "What obstacle is there but the Roman state, the falling away of which, by being scattered into 10 kingdoms," so they already knew that the Roman Empire would fall apart. They knew this hundreds of years in advance, before it happened. And how could they know? Because they were studying Bible prophecy. And so do we. Okay, if we are a diligent student of Bible prophecies, we will not know the complete future. But there will be certain parts that we will not be surprised by some of the events that are visiting this world. Okay, and so also the Christians, they knew the Roman Empire, that it will fall. And it will not only fall, because that's not really new. Every civilization, okay, even our Western civilization, which is probably the most powerful civilization this world has seen after the flood, even our Western civilization would one day disappear. Okay, it may not be a reality and unthinkable for us today, but that's how it is. Okay, hopefully Jesus will return prior to that. But the point is that they also already knew how it will disappear, the Roman Empire. It's not that it is conquered, for example, like it was before. The Babylonians were conquered by the Medes were conquered by the Greeks, and the Greeks were conquered by the Romans. So, and they said it will not be like this. They said it will just fall apart. Okay, and that's how things turned out to be. But they knew it hundreds of years before. Let us read the sentence again. "What obstacle is there but the Roman state, the falling away of which, by being scattered into 10 kingdoms, shall introduce Antichrist upon its own ruins? And that the beast, Antichrist, with his false prophet, may wage war on the church of God." So he is combining here. He says the little horn is the Antichrist, and the beast in Revelation 13, that's also the Antichrist. And again, we see the Roman Antichrist is the Antichrist is not the Roman Empire. There is no preterism in this. For them, the Antichrist is in the future. But it's also not futurism for them, because they expected the Antichrist not to come in 2,000 years, but after the fall of the Roman Empire. They had a very precise understanding of this, which turned out to be true. Okay, it's not futurism. We call this way of interpreting Bible prophecy historicism. Okay, the prophecy starts in the time of the prophet, and it develops over the centuries till the return of Christ. Okay, so there's one kingdom coming, rising after another. That's historicism, and that's exactly how they interpreted Bible prophecy. So the earliest church interpreted the Bible prophecy according to historicism. They expected the Antichrist to come after the fall of the Roman Empire. Now we will read a quote from a man called Henry Grattan Guinness. And he was an Irish Protestant Christian preacher, evangelist, and an author. He was a great evangelist, and he's basically responsible for sending out hundreds of missionaries. So he was a real full-hearted and full-blood Protestant. And he writes the following. The early church, through the writings of the fathers, and by the way, we are in the 19th century here, okay? The early church, through the writings of the fathers, tells us what it knew upon the subject. That while the Caesars held imperial power, it was impossible for the predicted Antichrist to arise, and that on the fall of the Caesars he would arise. The early church knew, he says, what this hindrance was. Now he's referring to a church father he was quoting. The early church knew, he says, what this hindrance was. The early church tells us what it did know upon the subject, and no one in these days, in our days today, can be in a position to contradict its testimony as to what Paul had by word of mouth only told the Thessalonians. It is a point on which ancient tradition alone can have any authority. Modern speculation is positively impertinent on such a subject. And then we have a footnote. As to the let or hindrance to the manifestation of the man of sin referred to in 2 Thessalonians 2, Mr. Elliot says, we have the consenting testimony of the early fathers from Irenaeus, the disciple of St. John, down to Chrysostom and Jerome, who were living in the 4th century, to the effect that it was understood to be the imperial power ruling and residing at Rome. Okay, that's how the early church understood it. The Antichrist would arise after the fall of the Roman Empire. And here we have Irenaeus. And the context of this quote is that there were some people back then in the 2nd century, as you can see, who were trying to calculate who the Antichrist is. And they took the number 666 and they tried all kinds of names and said, oh, maybe he's the Antichrist, or he, or that, or this and there. And Irenaeus is saying them, let them await, those people that are trying to figure out in the 2nd century already who the Antichrist is. Let them await, in the first place, the division of the kingdom into 10. Then in the next place, when these kings are reigning and beginning to set their affairs in order and advance their kingdom, let them learn to acknowledge that he who shall come claiming the kingdom for himself is truly the abomination of desolation. He's talking about the Antichrist here. And he says that there is no need for you to calculate now who the Antichrist is, because the time is not yet for that. First, the Roman Empire must be divided into many kingdoms. And when these kingdoms start to reign, then the Antichrist would come. And he's linking the Antichrist to the abomination of desolation. Okay? That's what we did also in the last lecture. So, and the beginning marks it that and that's what I said, they did not expect the Antichrist to arise 2,000 years after the fall of the Roman Empire, but very closely after it, after that event. So let us summarize what we saw. The Antichrist. The early church, in regard to the what, they said that it is the little horn in Daniel 7. It's the lawless one, it's the man of lawlessness, it's the mystery of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians 2. It's the first beast from Revelation 13, and it's the abomination of desolation in Matthew 24. They all are talking about the Antichrist. What about the when? What did they say? They said after the fall of the Roman Empire, and not only after the fall of the Roman Empire, but after the disintegration of the Roman Empire. And this happened in 476 after Christ. That was when the Roman Empire was disintegrated. And they knew, by the way, I want to make that point again, they knew already 300 years, and if we take Paul, already 400 years in advance, that the Roman Empire would fall apart. It will not be conquered. Okay, that's the great point here. Mostly, kingdoms are conquered, and that's why they disappear. But they knew that the Roman Empire will not be conquered, it will just disintegrate. And how could they know this? Because they were diligent Bible prophecy students. And so should we. That's why we are doing this here. Who is the Antichrist? And this is something where they didn't know, okay? Because this was in future. Now let us go to the Protestant Reformation. And here in Nuremberg, in Germany, you see there is an official building. I don't know the English name now for this. But there you have these figures over an entry. And here, for example, you see the lion with eagle's wings, and there you see Nebuchadnezzar. And on the other side, you have the bear with the 3 ribs in his mouth, and you have the Persian king. And over another entry, you have the leopard with its 4 heads. And next to him is Alexander the Great. And there you have this terrible beast that looks like a dog. Maybe for them, a terrible beast was a dog back then. With its 10 horns. And there you see Caesar. So the Protestant Reformation understood Daniel 7 basically the exact same way. And this is a picture of the Protestants in 1750. Colossus Monarchic Statua Danielis. And there you see the same, this is basically Daniel 2, okay, with Daniel 7 combined. You see the statue there, and the animals, the lion, the bear, the leopard, and the dog, which shall be the dreadful beast. And they interpret it the same way. So it's in harmony with the teachings of the early Christian church. Now, let us have a look at what the Reformers understood about the Antichrist. And there we have Georg Nigrinus, and he was a Lutheran theologian, and he had a kind of discussion with a Jesuit, which is a Catholic elite, so to say. And he's reporting of this. He says, because it annoyed the Jesuits so much and they declared it to be a great blasphemy that I had previously written that the Pope was the true Antichrist, of whom Daniel, Paul, Peter and John, even Christ himself prophesied. This be as certain among all Orthodox Christians as it is certain that Jesus Christ is the crucified and the true Messiah. Therefore I am ready to prove such a thing on the basis of the meaning of the word Antichrist as the Jesuit himself declared it and must also admit. So this is plain language. The Antichrist is the Pope, is the Roman Catholic Church. And the way he says this is, this knowledge shall be as certain to Orthodox Christians, so to Bible true and faithful Christians, it shall be as certain as that the Pope is the Antichrist as it is that Jesus is the true Christ. Okay, these are strong words. And here we have Charles Haddon Spurgeon. He was not really a reformer, he was in the 19th century, but let us read what he has to say. It is the duty of every Christian to pray against Antichrist, and as to what Antichrist is, no sane man ought to raise a question. If it is not the Popery in the Church of Rome and in the Church of England, there is nothing in the world that can be called by that name. If there were to be issued a hue and cry for Antichrist, we should certainly take up those two churches on suspicion, and they certainly would not be let loose again, for they so exactly answer the description. Popery anywhere, whether it be Anglican or Romish, is contrary to Christ's gospel. And it is the Antichrist, and we ought to pray against it. It should be the daily prayer of every believer that Antichrist might be hurled like a millstone in the flood and sink to rise no more. If we can pray against error for Christ because it wounds Christ, because it robs Christ and of His glory, because it puts sacramental efficacy in the place of His atonement and lifts a piece of bread into the place of the Savior and a few drops of water into the place of the Holy Spirit, and puts a mere fallible man like ourselves up as the vicar of Christ on earth, if we pray against it because it is against Him, we shall love the persons though we hate the errors. We shall love their souls though we loathe and detest their dogmas, and so the breath of our prayers will be sweetened because we turn our faces towards Christ when we pray. What about Martin Luther? Now, this is an article in the Newsweek, and Newsweek was a widely distributed newsweekly in the 20th century. And there they write about Martin Luther. Martin Luther was the first to identify the papacy as such with the Antichrist. At first, he discounted the value of John's Apocalypse. But then he saw in it a revelation of the Church of Rome as the deceiving Antichrist who secretly served Satan. For him, the papacy was the synagogue of Satan and the kingdom of Babylon and of the true Antichrist, a view that was to become dogma for all Protestant churches. All Protestant churches held that position. They saw in the Antichrist, in the Roman Catholic Church, the Antichrist. And they could only come to that conclusion because they were sound Bible students. And they used the exact same method of interpreting Bible prophecy that they have received from the early Christian church. Now, today's Protestantism threw this principle away, okay? And they have received the interpreting methods of the Roman Catholic Church, of the Jesuit order. And that's why they are coming to totally different conclusions. We will come to this later. A book had been written against him by a Roman theologian, against Luther, named Ambrosius Catharinus. And Luther now says, "I will rouse the choler of that Italian beast," said Luther. He kept his word. In his answer, Responsio ad librum Ambrosii Catharini, he proved by the revelations of Daniel and St. John, by the epistles of St. Paul, St. Peter, and St. Jude, that the kingdom of Antichrist predicted and described in the Bible was no other than the papacy. "I know for certain," said he in conclusion, "that our Lord Jesus Christ liveth and reigneth. In the strength of that assurance I could face 10,000 popes and never shrink. May God visit us at length according to His infinite power, and hasten the day of the glorious coming of His Son, in which He shall destroy that man of sin. And let all the people say, Amen." And all the people did say Amen. A sacred dread took possession of every mind. The image of Antichrist seated on the pontifical throne was present to every imagination. This new idea, so startlingly displayed by Luther to his contemporaries in the glowing colors of prophetic delineation, gave a fearful shock to the power of Rome. Faith in the divine word succeeded to that unqualified submission which had hitherto been rendered to the Church, and the Pope's authority, so long regarded with the deepest reverence, was now the object of general detestation and terror. There's another quote that is just listing some of those Protestants, famous Protestants. Wycliffe, Tyndale, Luther, Calvin, Cranmer. In the 17th century, Bunyan, the translators of the King James Bible, and the man who published the Westminster and Baptist Confessions of Faith. So the Baptists. Sir Isaac Newton, Wesley, Whitefield, Jonathan Edwards, and more recently Spurgeon, Bishop J.C. Ryle, and Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones. These men, among countless others, all saw the office of the papacy as the Antichrist. So for the Protestants who took the Bible by its word, it was absolutely clear that there was no other way. If we do sound interpretation of the Bible, that the papacy is the Antichrist. You couldn't come around that. So if we go back to our overview, for the Christians in the first century, it was not clear who the Antichrist will be. He was still in the future. But for the reformers, and already before, in fact, so we have the Waldensians and Albigensians and these persecuted groups. For them also, it was absolutely clear that the Roman Catholic Church must be the Antichrist. Why that? Because the Roman Catholic Church is the power that ascended after the Roman Empire fell. And that is exactly what was to be expected and how things should turn out. And that's how things turned out. So the power that rose when the Roman Empire was disintegrated into all these kingdoms that we saw on the map, the power that arose out of this system of chaos was the Roman Catholic Church. And that is exactly what Bible prophecy was telling us. And if you listen to Protestant sermons today, you will very, 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 very almost never hear this. If they are talking about the Antichrist, they are talking about something totally different. And this has a reason. And you find that reason in the Jesuit order. Now, the Jesuit order was an order that was founded by the Roman Catholic Church by a man called Ignatius Loyola. And the sole purpose of that order was to blot out Protestantism. That's why it was founded. That's why it existed. And let me just say, it's the goal of the Jesuit order till now. Till now. Now they don't have to fight anymore because Protestantism has killed itself. But they really fought Protestantism by word and sword. Okay. But I don't want to go into this. The early church, the persecuted medieval Christianity and Protestantism all advocated the concept of interpretation that inevitably pointed to the Roman Catholic Church as the Antichrist. Why does it look different today? So you have the early church fathers, you have the persecuted church in the Dark Ages, you have Protestantism, the Reformation. They all used that concept of interpretation called historicism. And they clearly came to the conclusion that there is no other way than to see the Antichrist in the Roman Catholic Church. And why is it different today? And as I said, the answer is the Jesuit order. Their goal was to bring the papacy, to restore its power, to bring it back on the throne, to lay the whole world again at its feet. That was their goal. That was their task, that was their mission. So it was the spiritual light of the Roman Catholic Church. And now if they want to have the papacy being relieved of the charge of being the Antichrist, then the only way they can change that, and they knew they cannot, it's not possible for them to take away the Bibles from the people anymore. The people had the Bible. So before to the Bible, Roman Catholic Church dealt with this issue by taking away the Bible. Okay, that's how they dealt with this. If the people don't have the Bible, they cannot read it, they cannot figure out that they are the Antichrist. But now the people have the Bible, And now the people are reading the Bible, and in order now, the only thing that they can do is they must change the way people are reading the Bible. They must change the way people are interpreting Bible prophecy. And that's exactly the challenge that basically 3 Jesuit theologians, they tackled that challenge. They took it upon themselves. And you have Louis Alcazar, and he invented this system or this method of preterism, that the Antichrist is in the past. So when Daniel is talking about the Antichrist, he is talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, a Greek, really insignificant king. But according to Daniel 8, this little horn shall be greater, exceedingly great, shall be of greater power than the Persian kingdom, shall be of greater power than the Greek kingdom under Alexander. Let me just say, Antiochus Epiphanes cannot meet up with this, okay? In regard to Alexander, he was nothing. But that's how the little horn shall be. It shall be greater than Alexander, okay? But that's a different topic. But he says, okay, in Daniel, the Antichrist is Antiochus Epiphanes. In the book of Revelation, the Antichrist, it's the Roman Empire, it's Caesar, or whatsoever. But we saw that the church did not understand it that way. Even although they suffered persecution, they knew that the Antichrist would come after the fall of the Roman Empire. And then you have Francisco Ribera and Roberto Bellarmino, and both of them, they developed actually what is then called futurism. And that is that the Antichrist is not in the past, it's not in the present, it's in the future. He will come somewhere, and I don't know, we don't know when. Preterism began with Porphyry in the 3rd century AD. He was not a Christian, but a Neoplatonist philosopher who attacked Christianity. So it's quite interesting that there lies the origin of preterism, of this concept of preterism. We know that he was the first one who holds that Daniel was history written up as prophecy. So it's not true prophecy, it's basically history, but someone is doing as if he's a prophet, okay? And the first to say that the prophecies of Daniel focused upon Antiochus Epiphanes as their central figure. This idea and the later futurism became useful tools in the Catholic Counter-Reformation through the Jesuits. At that time, around 1563 to 1600, Catholic interpreters went in both directions to parry the thrust of the Reformers' prophetic interpretations. The Spanish Jesuit Alcazar developed preterism, while the Jesuit cardinals Bellarmine and Ribera developed futurism. Protestantism did not follow these paths until the 18th and 19th centuries. So that's what we read. Okay, we saw Grattan Guinness, we saw Spurgeon, and many others. They still hold that traditional Protestant way of interpreting the Bible that was in harmony with the early church. Again, I'm saying this again and again. So they were on solid ground here, and they held this position up until the 18th and 19th century. An English deist named Collins published a commentary on Daniel in 1737, in which he took up the preterist view of Daniel. His commentary gives credit to Porphyry for this view. Dispensationalist futurism came along in the 1820s, developed by John Darby. For that reason, it is sometimes called Darbyism. Liberal academic Protestantism has followed in the steps of Collins by accepting preterism, while much of conservative evangelical Protestantism has embraced dispensationalism. Okay, now, isn't this absolutely crazy? If you think, where has Protestantism come to? Okay, you have Jesuits, they invent preterism, and they invent futurism, and they are proclaiming this. And finally, you have Protestantism taking these two concepts that were developed by the Jesuit order in order to destroy Protestantism. That's why they were invented. That's why the Jesuit order exists. And every breath of a Jesuit actually is invested in that goal of destroying Protestantism. And you have Protestantism receiving that which was determined to destroy Protestantism. And today's Protestantism is based on Jesuit theology that is meant to destroy Protestantism. This is absolutely crazy. But it's even more crazy that you can show this to Protestants and they just ignore it. Now let us go a step further with our discussion on that beast. Now we saw it is the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, that's as simple as it is. There's a prophecy in regards to time. It says in verse 5 that to this beast, to this power, was given authority to continue for 42 months. So 42 months. And always remember that we are in symbolic prophecy here. This is important. We must never forget that. And these 42 months, they are in harmony with Daniel's 3.5 times. When Daniel is talking about the Antichrist in Daniel 7, he's giving 3.5 times as a time period. And these times is an expression for years. You can see this if you compare it to Daniel 4. So we have 3.5 years as a time span. But what does these 3.5 years mean? Again, we are in symbolic Bible prophecy. We have two texts in the book of Revelation. Then the woman fled into the wilderness. It's not important what that means. Our focus is on this time period issue. Then the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God that they should feed her there 1,260 days. And in the same chapter, it's talking about the very same event. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle that she might fly into the wilderness to her place where she is nourished. But now it says not 1,260 days, but it says a time, times, and half a time. So here we have the 3.5 times again, the 3.5 years. And by this we know that 3.5 times, that means 3.5 years, and 1,260 days mean the same thing. And that way we know that 3.5 times 42 months and 1,260 days mean the same time span. And that means that one prophetic month has 30 days. That's simple mathematics. But what does that mean? We are in symbolic Bible prophecy. Okay, so we are dealing with symbols, and that means that also our day is a symbol. But a symbol for what? Now we find an important passage for us in Ezekiel 4. There, Ezekiel is called by God to illustrate something. He shall make a symbolic act there that should tell the Israelites something. So he's giving basically a prophecy through symbolism. That's what he's doing here. You also, son of man, take a clay tablet and lay it before you and portray on it a city, Jerusalem. Lay siege against it, build a siege wall against it, and heap up a mound against it. Set camps against it also, and place battering rams against it all around. Moreover, take for yourself an iron plate, and set it as an iron wall between you and the city. Set your face against it, and it shall be besieged, and you shall lay siege against it. This will be a sign to the house of Israel. Lie also on your left side, and lay the iniquity of the house of Israel upon it. According to the number of the days that you lie on it, you shall bear their iniquity. So he's called by God to illustrate, or to illustrate through symbolic act the siege of Jerusalem through the Babylonians. And in this symbolic act, what is he to do? And he says now, God says, "For I have laid on you the years of their iniquity, according to the number of the days, 390 days. So you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Israel. And when you have completed them, lie again on your right side. Then you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. I have laid on you a day for each year. Therefore you shall set your face toward the siege of Jerusalem, your arm shall be uncovered, and you shall prophesy against it. Okay, in this symbolic act, God said, the house of Judah was unfaithful for 40 years, and that's why you shall lay on your side 40 days. A day in your symbolic act as a year in reality. And this is basically the key. Okay? So we know in symbolic Bible prophecy, a day is equaling a year in reality. So the 3.5 years is symbolism, and it's 1,260 days, and in reality, it's 1,260 years. Okay, that is important. And now let us have a look at what the Protestants, the Reformers had to say in regard to this. And here again, this is Georg Nigrinus, who again with his discussion with the Jesuit, and he's writing about it. He, the Jesuit, went to great lengths to prove that the Pope could not be the Antichrist because the papacy has already existed for hundreds of years, but the Antichrist would only rule for 3.5 years. Okay, now, so the Jesuit here is arguing he's taking the beast as symbol, but the days he's taking literal. Okay? And now Nigrinus says that's not sound interpreting the Bible. If we say it's symbolic language, then also the days is symbolic. We read on. Daniel and John agree in the time 2 times and half a time, the 42 months and the 1,260 days. That this means natural years, months and days the fathers themselves cannot prove. We in contrast can prove that it is the custom of Scripture to set a day for a year, as seen in Ezekiel 4 verse 3. That's what we just read. And now they add another proof for that. The years, weeks of Daniel testify to the same. And this last argument also was a very strong argument for the Reformers, because they said if Daniel 9 is referring to the Messiah, when salvation shall be brought and sin shall be blotted out and the sacrificial system shall come to its end, so it's obviously referring to the Messiah. And he says, when this is referring to the Messiah, then these 70 weeks and these 490 days must be understood as 490 years. Otherwise, you will not come to Jesus. Okay, can only come from the time of the rebuilding of Jerusalem to Jesus if these 490 days are years. And they are years because we are in symbolic prophecy. Okay, so they have to be understood symbolic and they mean a year. And that's also, they say, if it's day-year principle is valid here, then the day-year principle is to apply here as well. So we have 100,260 years. Now we have the time span. But the time span is useless unless we have a starting point and an end point, or we need a starting point or an end point, and then we know how to span it. Okay? And we are addressing this now. And we'll have a look at the starting point. And we have to go to the Emperor Justinian. Now we are in the time that the first Christians expected. The Roman Empire was disintegrated, 476. And these 10 kings, or in symbolism it was 10 kings, but it were many kingdoms that were coming up out of the Roman Empire when it disintegrated. They started to rule and did their things. And then there's the Emperor Justinian coming up. And he has the great goal to reunite the Roman Empire, to bring the Roman Empire to its old strength and glory. And the condition here is that the Roman Empire had fallen way earlier in the 4th century already. I don't know if it was in 391. I'm not sure on this. Okay, the Roman Empire was divided into a Eastern Empire and into a Western Empire, and you had 2 Caesars. Now, and by times you had 4, and it changed. But now Justinian in the East is the sole emperor. The emperor in the West is gone. Okay, there is no emperor in Rome anymore, in the city of Rome. There is only the Pope. But the Pope is surrounded by all these Germanic, by the Germanic rulers, because they took over the Western Empire. So he cannot act the way he would like to, because he's surrounded by enemies. Now you have Justinian, and he's trying to reunite the Roman Empire, and one great way, and that is basically what I wanted to say, with the division of the empire in East and Western Empire, you not only had an Eastern Caesar and a Western Caesar, but you also had a Western Church and an Eastern Church. And for the Western Church, this is the Latin Church, you had the Pope of Rome, the Bishop of Rome, being the ruler. But the Eastern Church obviously also had its ruler, and this was the Bishop of Constantinople. And each one of them actually wanted to be superior to the other. And they were arguing, who is more important, the Bishop of Rome or the Bishop of Constantinople? Now, Justinian is here, and he's struggling with the issue that he has the Eastern Empire, but the Western Empire is totally fell apart. But he wants to reunite this whole thing. And he's coming up with the idea that he would empower, since there is no Caesar in the West anymore, that he would empower the Pope, the Bishop of Rome in the West. And he's now saying the following thing. We have exerted ourselves, this is Justinian talking about himself in the plural, to unite all the priests of the East and subject them to the see of your holiness. So he's now saying, he's now making an end to this discussion. Who is more important, the Bishop of Constantinople in the East or the Bishop of Rome? And he's saying now, the Bishop of Rome is superior, and all the priests, that includes the Bishop of Constantinople, they are subjected to the see of Rome. You are the head of all the holy churches. For we shall exert ourselves in every way, as has already been stated, to increase the honor and authority of your see. And then Pope John wrote back to Justinian, you have subjected all things to its authority. It's funny that the Pope is answering with, you have subjected all things. But yeah, okay. Yeah. And have given it unity. This see of Rome, that means the Pope, is indeed the head of all churches. Heidi Hikes, this is a book that is dealing a lot with this, when did this 1,260 year period begin? And he has some quite interesting information in this book. On March 15, Justinian wrote his famous letter to Pope John II. In the same year, on March 25, he wrote to Epiphanius, Patriarch of Constantinople, so this is the Bishop of Constantinople, confirming that the Pope now was the head of the Church and the corrector of heretics, and this is important, and giving the Pope all ecclesiastical power and authority. Now the Pope has the right to say and tell what is wrong and what is right. Okay, so the Pope is defining what is heresy and what is truth. Okay. Now the problem is that the Pope was surrounded by his enemies. In 476, the city of Rome and thereby the Pope as well, came under Arian Gothic dominion. Now, this is a Germanic tribe that conquered Rome, the city of Rome, and brought an end to the Western Roman Empire. And because of that, it fell apart, it disintegrated. But the city of Rome fell into Gothic dominion here, and thereby also the Pope. And they were Arians. So these Germanic tribes, they were largely Christians. But they had a different Christian faith than the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church. And in fact, the Roman Catholic Church really hated the way they believed. And the greatest goal they had was to blot that faith out. Okay, but they couldn't because, you know, the Pope had no military, but the Goths had, so he was kept quiet in this issue. Now then, in 533, we have this decree of Justinian that we just read, that the Pope is the head of all the churches, so he is the chief of the churches and he's the corrector of heretics. And he has given him authority, that's what we read. And now Justinian is freeing, Rome is now freed in 538 from the Arians. Now it's that if I have the numbers correctly, it's in 536 that Justinian conquered Rome, or in 537. I'm not 100% sure in this. He conquered Rome and he drove the Goths out there. But the Goths came back and took the city again. Okay, or at least they sieged it. Okay, so it still wasn't free. And then Justinian sent a second army, and then in 538 this siege was broken and they were driven out, and the city of Rome was freed from the Arians in 538. And that means from that on the Pope could rule as head of all churches, because now he was free from his enemies. And there is another point in this as well. And that is, Justinian is the emperor of the East. And he's making a decree that is addressing an issue that is not on his territory. Okay? And this doesn't work. Okay? I mean, for example, here in Germany, our government, they could make a decree and say, in Basel, which is a city in Switzerland, there and this shall happen. But this decree is worthless. Why is it worthless? Because Basel doesn't belong to the territory of Germany. And only when Basel is falling, is becoming part of Germany, part of its legislation power, okay, where the laws have power to be executed, then this law is becoming valid. And this is exactly what happened in 538. There Rome became part of the Eastern, or part of Justinian's empire, and therefore this law, this decree, came into force there. The Catholic Church, now this is Pope Pius IX, the Catholic Church, founded and instituted by Christ the Lord to provide for the eternal salvation of man, has achieved by virtue of her divine institution the form of a perfect society. Therefore she must enjoy in the exercise of her sacred ministry that freedom which takes away from her the subjection to any civil power. In order to operate freely as it was necessary, she had to make use of those supports that responded to the conditions and needs of the times. So that means she needs some other people that help her. When the Roman Empire dissolved, okay, and was divided into various kingdoms, the Roman pontiff, constituted by Christ, the head and center of the whole church, okay, that's what Justinian decreed, okay, therefore obtained civil principality due to a special disposition of divine providence. And that is what we just read, okay? this decree of Justinian. So basically the Pope is repeating in some other words the whole history that we just had a look at in his words. This was arranged with supreme wisdom by God himself, so that in the midst of such a multitude and variety of temporal sovereigns, the supreme pontiff would have that political freedom which was indispensable for exercising without any impediment his spiritual power, his authority, and its jurisdiction over the whole world. Okay, now this is the claim for the papacy. Okay, its jurisdiction over the whole world. So, papacy, Roman Catholic Church, the Pope cannot be okay with nothing less than ruling over the whole world. Because they are the vicar of Christ. They are to represent Christ and his kingdom, his dominion on this earth, and therefore they must have world rulership. That's what they are to strive for. Okay? By their own understanding. Very simple. No longer dominated by the Emperor of the West, the papacy gained ascendancy and the Church of Rome grew mighty amidst decay. It assumed the place of the empire, and already a firm and powerful institution when the empire fell, remained unshaken by the fate of the ancient world. Filling for the time the void caused by the disappearance of the empire, it formed the bridge between the ancient and modern world. And here we have a last quote. With the conquest of Rome by Belisarius, the history of the ancient city may be considered as terminating. And with his defense against Vitiges, so when this siege was broken, commences the history of the Middle Ages, of the times of destruction and of change. So here he says, George Finlay, History of Greece, that the 8 times of the Middle Ages started in 538. And the Middle Ages is the time where the Roman Catholic Church rules. So they started in 538. Now, let us go to, I haven't mentioned yet, it says that this beast, the Antichrist, would receive a deadly wound. So somehow its power must be broken. And if we look here what, so the power of the papacy must be broken. And if we look here what Wikipedia, for example, had to say on February 10th in 1798. It says here, the papacy is removed from power by French General Louis-Alexandre Berthier. And if we add this to our chart here, so in 1798, the French armies invade the Vatican, the Pope is taken captive, and the power of the papacy is ended, and the Pope then dies in exile. If we take the span here, it's 1,260 years. That's exactly what the Bible was telling us, this time span. Okay. And now let us go to some Protestants that were referring to this time span. David Simpson, theologian and Methodist. And doth not the triple crown even now dance upon his head? Or rather, has he not forever lost all right and title to wear it? Is it not extremely remarkable and a powerful confirmation of the truth of Scripture prophecy that just 1,260 years ago from the present 1798, in the very beginning of the year 538, Belisarius put an end to the empire of the Goths at Rome, leaving no power therein but the bishop of that metropolis? Read these things in the prophetic scriptures, compare them coolly with the present state of Europe, and then, I say again, deny the truth of divine revelation if you can. Open your eyes and behold these things accomplishing in the face of the whole world. This is not done in a corner. So he says, look at this history. It has been predicted hundreds of years in advance. And it is happening exactly on the year. This is fulfilled. And I'm coming to a man that is for me very fascinating. This is Drew Creason. I don't know how he's called. Yeah. And he's living in the 17th century, at the end of the 17th century. And he says the following: it may easily be apprehended that it is not my business here to prove the principles upon which I rely, because this is but the consequence of another work. But yet I will here make use of no other suppositions than such as are the most obvious things in the whole prophecy, and are therefore generally agreed upon by all Protestant interpreters of any note. Okay, there is no discussion on this. He will now tell what these things are. And of that kind are these that follow, which I therefore take as so many acknowledged postulata or foundations to proceed upon. That these were the foundations of interpreting Bible prophecy. Second, he's listing a few points. I just picked some of them out. That the time, times and half a time, the 42 months of the Reist and the 1,260 days are 1,260 years and are all one and the same individual time. Okay, that's what we just saw. He says there is no discussion in Protestant theology in this. 5, that Babylon is the city of Rome in the state of ecclesiastical dominion. Okay, so the Roman Catholic Church is the system of Babylon, or it's fulfilled in it. Now here's the quote that is really fascinating for me. Now this is difficult to understand, and I had to read it a few times in order to understand what he's basically doing here in this whole chapter. He's talking about the 7 last plagues. And he's trying to figure out how these things work together. When will they come, and in the order, and so on and so forth. And he's making a statement about the 1,260 years. And this is absolutely fascinating. I hope you can follow this without reading the whole chapter. It is therefore very reasonable to conclude from hence that the end of the time of the vials, these are the 7 plagues, will not be much sooner or later than about 100 years hence. And then, since the last vial ends with the destruction of the beast, this is a new confirmation of that which has been elsewhere advanced, that the first appearance of the beast was at Justinian's recovery of the Western Empire, from which time to about the year 1800 will be about 1,260 years. So here again, he's also saying when Justinian reconquered Rome, the first appearance of the Antichrist started. Now, the first appearance also includes a second appearance, and that is important. I think I already stated this in a previous topic. Like Jesus appeared 2 times, was 2 times revealed, one is yet to come. The Antichrist as well has 2 revelations. One appearance and a second appearance. And he's talking about the first appearance here. And he says, these 1,260 years must end somewhere 1800. And now on the other side, it may be observed that what a confirmation it is of the applications that have been made of the trumpets and vials, that the first appearance of the beast has been proved to have begun with Justinian. That which does receive the greatest advantage by this is the application of the vials. For if the first time of the beast was at Justinian's recovery of the city of Rome, then must not it end until before the year 1800. So the time of the beast, he said, started with the recovery of Jerusalem and with the recovery of the city of Rome through Justinian. And he says, and its time, and this is the 1,260 years, will end little before the year 1800. That's what he said. And he says this in 1689. So more than 100 years before. He said that the Roman Catholic Church, the power will be broken little before 1800. And my dear friends, 1798, little before 1800? Absolutely. And this is fascinating. This man told you almost the exact year. And I'm sure if he had an exact year for the recovery of the city of Rome at hand, he would have calculated the exact end as well. But he obviously didn't have. So he's just given the approximate end. But he can tell you the story of the Roman Catholic Church more than 100 years before. How could he do that? Because he was studying Bible prophecy. He could tell you the end of the Roman Catholic Church, that it would be directly before 1800. This is for me absolutely fascinating. I'm not sure if I could transport this information in an appropriate way. So, the prophetic kingdoms. Now, in the book of Revelation, there are 7 prophetic kingdoms, or in the whole Bible prophecy, 7 prophetic kingdoms. And the 5th kingdom, we saw the first 4. The 5th kingdom is the little horn from Daniel 7, and this is the papacy, this is the Antichrist. From 538 to 1798, 1260 years, exactly fulfilled. Okay, and it was even foretold more than 100 years before. Okay, that's the first beast. Now there is a second beast to come. We read about this in Revelation 13:11. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. Again, we are in symbolic Bible prophecy. So there is a beast, and a beast means a political entity, a power. Okay, like Babylon was a political power, like Persia and Greece and so on. Here's another beast. So there's another political power coming up. An important power. But this time it's coming up out of the earth. Now remember the first beast and all the others, they came up out of the sea. What does earth mean? We go to Genesis 1. Then God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And we add to this Revelation 17:15. Then he said to me, "The waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues." So here, this is very fortunate, and the book of Revelation is interpreting the symbol of waters, is doing the interpretation for us. We don't have to do that job. And it says, waters in symbolic Bible prophecy mean peoples, multitudes, nations, so crowded places where there are a lot of peoples and nations living. And the gathering of these waters is the seas. So when the first beast was rising up, this Antichrist beast, it was coming up out of the sea. That's what we saw. And that means that it rose and it somewhere where there were a lot of other nations dwelling, and where it is a crowded place. Okay? And that's exactly how it was. I mean, it popped up, it grew up out of the Roman Empire, and there were a lot of nations and peoples and tongues and whatsoever living. So it was a quite populated area. But now it says that the beast is coming out of the earth. And from Revelation, the earth is where water is, I don't say completely absent, because there are still seas. Okay, God designed this earth, the dry land, still be so that there are rivers and there are seas. So it's not completely without water, but there are not these huge oceans. Okay, so the dry land must be a place where there is but very, very, very little population. Okay, and that means the beast that comes out of the earth means that it is a kingdom that would rise after 1798 in a mostly unpopulated area and would slowly become a new world power. Now I have to explain some things here. I forgot them. This second beast obviously is coming after the first beast. Okay, and that means that it is coming also in regard to time after the first beast. Okay, I think that's logic. So we should expect that it comes up to power after 1798, because that's where the power ended for the first beast. And it must be a kingdom that will rise in a mostly unpopulated area. That is what it means, out of the earth. It's not coming out of the sea, not where it is crowded, where there are a lot of nations. It's where there is but few population. Let us read on. And he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. Like a lamb. Now a lamb is a symbol for Christ, obviously. Okay, and especially this contrast, lamb, dragon. Dragon is the symbol for the devil, lamb is the symbol for Jesus. So it's a Christian nation, it's a Jesus-like nation, it's a Christian nation that is coming up here. That's predicted, that would rise after 1798. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence and causes the earth and those who dwell in it, that means this is a world-spanning influence. It causes the earth and all those that dwell in it to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. So the earth and those who dwell in it, that means this power must have worldwide influence. And the influence must be of that kind that it says it causes, it makes. So we could ask, is this including force? Okay. So it must be an extremely powerful nation that will have worldwide influence. And if we sum this up, what we just see here, very simple. It must be a Christian nation that would rise after 1798 in a mostly unpopulated area and would slowly become a new world power. Now, if we were in school, I would send you home now with this at home as homework to figure out a nation that rose, that entered the stage after 1798, that is a Christian nation and that became or would become a world power that has worldwide influence. And I think if you would do your homework very properly, it's actually very simple to answer the question what this nation is, and it can only be the United States of America. Now this will be surprising for many, because if you would tell someone on the street that the Bible is talking about the United States, they would look at you with huge eyes, okay? But the fact is, the Bible is really speaking about the United States. Okay, so this second beast, you cannot interpret it other ways. It's the United States. It must be a power that is rising up in an unpopulated area, and North America was unpopulated. There were Indian tribes, but compared to Europe, it was really, 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 really unpopulated. Okay, like the dry land. Yes, you have water on the dry land. There is a sea here and there is a sea here. There's a river flowing here. But this is nothing a contrast to an ocean. Okay, like there. Yes, there was population, but this population was very thin. So it was a mostly unpopulated area. It fits perfectly well the description that the Bible is making here. And it's lamb-like. So it must be a Christian nation. You can go through history, you can go through the present, you will find no other power that would fit that description but the United States of America. Okay, there is no other power. I know some people are bringing up China here because it speaks there or something like a dragon, or what these people basically are doing, they are not consistent in the way they are interpreting. Because it says there is a beast coming out of the earth. Now, if I take now the dragon literally here and say, okay, it must be China, then I have to take the whole thing literal. So then I must search for a beast that is coming up out of the earth that speaks like a lamb and that looks like a lamb and speaks like a dragon. And this will be a quite, maybe there is an animal like this, but I don't think, and we will all agree that this is not the point the Bible is trying to make here. So we have to be consistent in the way we are interpreting Bible prophecy. And this China, it can't be China, because China is not Christ-like. It's not a Christian nation. In fact, it's the contrary. Okay, it's a socialist nation. It's a Christ-hating nation. So it's only the United States of America. So we go back to our list of the prophetic kingdoms, and we have the sixth kingdom is United States of America, and we have from 1798 to today. So we are now in the present, and there is a seventh kingdom, We will not have a look at this today, but we will have a look at this, and I think it's in the 7th topic, I think, when we will talk about Babylon. So just a brief outline of the early history of the United States. Now there are people that could do it way better than I, but I'm just trying to make it a bit here. The first settlement we have through Spain in the 16th century, and France and England, they came there since 1600. It were mostly fleeing Christians, okay, and they understood this this United States being the new promised land, the new Canaan. Okay, God leading them out from the Babylonian captivity, which is the papacy, and He's now bringing them to Canaan, a new promised land. Okay, they saw this parallel here. Then you had from 7030 to 7040, you had the first Great Awakening. So this was a huge awakening, Christian awakening among the population of the United States, which was back then in the northern east. And it awakened a huge religious interest and also an interest in religious freedom. So religious freedom was coming up here and coming into focus, which then became one of the key principles of the United States. Freedom in religious matters. In 1776, the Declaration of Independence. Okay, you had the Independence War, the War of Independence from 1775 to 1783. The Constitution of the United States, written 1787, ratified in 1788, and it came to force in 1789. And from 1800 to 1840, you have what is called the Second Great Awakening. And through this awakening, there were many millions coming to the Protestantism. They converted to Protestantism. Now, the United States always had also a quite large immigration from countries with Catholic background, but you have a huge conversion to Protestantism, and there were also important social reforms coming along with this. So these are reforms in regard to slavery, or also in regard to diet and the educational system. Now, many of these reforms failed, but some were successful, like the reform of slavery. And since 1800, you have the Western expansion. So as I said, it started in the northeastern and then become the eastern side of the United States. With 1803, you have the Louisiana Purchase, where they purchased a huge portion of territory from France. And through this purchase, the territory of the United States was doubled. Okay, so it was a massive purchase. I don't know the number, how much they paid for it. But anyways, then 1819, Spain was driven out from Florida. And from 1850, you have then what is called the Wild West. So this move towards west and trying to populate also the western part of the United States. So you see that and this is taking place at this shift from 1798, so around that time, from then on, United States you have this, that's why I brought this up, this expansion towards west. So there she's really growing from that time on. And this conversion to Protestantism and these social reforms that were brought up. So all this happened after 1798, and it grew from then on to the most powerful nation of this world. So the second beast and the sixth prophetic kingdom is the United States. Now, we may remember or not that in Revelation 13 it says, in regard to the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, that this whole scenario is an interaction basically between the first beast and the second beast. And so if we want to understand what the image of the beast is and what the mark of the beast is, we had to understand first what is the first beast and what is the second beast. Now that we know what the second beast is and what the first beast is, so we know we have the actors here. Now we can take the next step and have a look at the image of the beast. And we will do this in the following presentation. And there we will look at the image of the beast and also at the mark of the beast. And I hope we can make this in one presentation. I'm not sure. I don't want this to end with 2 hours or something like this. We will see this. And this is basically, then we are with this mark of the beast issue somewhere in the center of Bible prophecy, because there is this worship issue, there is this abomination of desolation issue that we discovered in the last lecture. And yeah, it will be a fascinating, interesting topic, so make sure you watch it also. And God bless. Now we will read a quote of a man who is called Grattan, I don't know, Henry Grattan Guinness. He was an Irish Protestant Christian preacher. He was a quite great evangelist. I have some problems with my light here. I don't know. Okay. Maybe I should turn it off.